You're
I'm
one.
here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're
Yeah.
back. So, you're uh, since you're here, um, I will let's begin with your questions here.
hmm
So, what is the interaction between the progress of insight and the progress of samatha? Could one draw a table with how the different jnanas feel in the different stages of TMI? Um, it's an interesting topic to discuss. Let me just see the rest of your question quickly, whether we answer this in two parts or combine them. I'm asking because about a month ago, I experienced a sudden drop in the clarity of the object of attention and a decrease in my ability to keep peripheral awareness wide open. Literally one day, distractions would not be able to grab my attention at all during the whole set. Next day, everything felt slippery and my attention would jump from one thing to the next. Are these changes common? Do they have to do with something happening in a different axis of practice? Well, maybe we'll do. We'll, uh, let's start with the first part. What is the interaction between the progress of insight and the progress of samatha? Could one draw a table with how the different jnanas feel in the different stages of TMI? So, yes, first of all, it's very important to understand where the progress of insight comes from. Um, it's it appeared in two different works, uh, relatively close to each other in time, and both of which bear their differences. They also bear a lot of similarities. One is called the Vimuttimagga, and the other is called the Visuddhimagga, and they appear in slightly different versions in both of those. Uh, they appear in about, if I recall correctly, about the 8th century AD, a very, very long time after the Buddha, and after Buddhism had undergone a tremendous amount of change. The Visuddhimagga, which the version of the progress of insight that most people are familiar with, derives from the Visuddhimagga, which was a compilation done in Sri Lanka, what we call Sri Lanka today, uh, of the teachings of uh, many of the great meditation masters of that time. The wording of the text is such that some say, some teach, some claim, because it is a compilation of the author of the Visuddhimagga, Buddha Gosa, um, was writing. I'm not sure what level of meditative attainment he might or might not have had, but he was writing as a scholar who had compiled this information from multiple sources. And he constructed from the information, from this information, this progress of insight, which much has been made of. What most people are familiar with is a version of the progress of insight that is derived from what's present in the Visuddhimagga, but differs from it in some very significant ways. It's a part of what's called Buddhist modernism or modern Buddhism. It was generated from the Visuddhimagga as a part of the Buddhist modernism movement was in reaction to Western colonialism, the introduction of, of science, rational philosophy, and Christianity into Buddhist countries. And Buddhism had, at that time, degenerated quite significantly, but some prominent Buddhists were motivated uh, to reinvigorate Buddhism um, in reaction to uh, Western rationalism, philosophy, and uh, all the other aspects of Western culture, which were being imposed upon them in that colonial era. Um, and so it's originally based on the Visuddhimagga and is part of a Buddhist revival that took place in reaction to European colonialism. The version that most people are familiar with, or most familiar with, is that of Mahasi Sayadaw. Okay. Now, what exactly is the progress of insight? It is a description of the knowledges, the insights uh, presented in uh, an order that is more or less developmental, but it is also, um, well, originally, to understand the framing of this, when Buddhaghosa in the 8th century assembled, his preamble to that said that this is for both those who have mastered concentration, which is the whole, which is a very major part of the whole work. It is the first, it's the first part of that work. And he said, but he amalgamated it with the experience of those who practiced a dry insight, insight without samadhi and samatha having been previously developed. So it's trying to bridge a couple of different approaches to insight and awakening. Um, it starts out with some very basic things, and these are things that um, somebody practicing TMI, you're interested in how it correlates with that. These are almost givens, but they are experienced directly and and become very evident to the meditator. But when I say there is givens, right in the beginning, I speak of extrospective and introspective awareness. And I speak in terms um, of the difference between mental phenomenon and physical phenomenon and sensory phenomenon and things like that. So several of the first jnanas are not really treated. They are, there is a deeper experiential understanding of this as, you know, as you begin to practice meditation. It becomes obvious the effect that external events have on internal events, the effect that internal events have on your actions and your subsequent, well, even what internal events have on terms of which of your sensory modalities is going to predominate in the moment and to a degree. Um, it becomes obvious. I mean, nobody sits down not realizing that that external events give rise causally to other external events. But one sees in meditation very quickly how mental events have a causal influence on other mental events. A thought produces an emotion, or an emotion produces a thought, or there's a feedback relationship between them. As you go along in your meditation, you, well, let's take, for example, a lot of emphasis is put in the progress of insight on the tilakkhana, the three characteristics. And these are some things that develop at more and more clearly as one goes along. First, as a result of your observation and experience in meditation, more at an intellectual level, but because of your risen from experience, the intellectual understanding serves to help that experience gel into more of an experiential insight. Okay. Um, and so as one goes along, um, it begins gradually to be more and more apparent how we create our suffering through our clinging and through our storytelling. And, you know, right there when I'm talking stage two, all the stories we make up when the meditation doesn't go the way we expect it to, or want it to, or hope it will. If you allow it to, this is telling you something very important about the nature of suffering. Likewise, in stage four, when it begins in stage three, but in stage four, much closer examination of physical pain and the idea of the relationship between pain and suffering. Um, the, uh, the clinging aspect that gives rise to the second arrow that makes the pain so intolerable rather than just accepting it as a physical sensation. Likewise, in stage two, you know, you're learning that there's no you that's in control of your mind. Of course, you don't become convinced of that for a long time, but it's both being pointed out to you with some nice little diagrams and things like that, and it's a creeping, growing recognition. It's pointed out to you that your mind is a multi-part system, and the whatever part of the system is wearing the hat that says I is changing from time to time. So all of the things that are described in the first jhanas are already present in the very earliest stages of TMI. Um, they could be laid out and just, you know, you could draw a correlation between when they arise. Now, the biggest, one of the things that, uh, one of the biggest things that is emphasized uh, in Mahasi's interpretation and use of the Visuddhimagga as progress of insight from the Visuddhimagga as it progresses, is as that stage of arising and passing away, which is actually divided into an early arising and passing away and a later arising and passing away. Um, this is something that, once again, there's been a gradually growing awareness that this is the nature of our perceptual phenomena in general. And of course, by the time you get to stage six, you have that direct experience of all of the conceptualization related to following the breath disappears, and what's left is just sensations arising and passing away. And that's all there really is, rising and passing away. Well, what what in the progress of this is where we're talking about kind of an amalgamation of Buddha dosas, because it's around this point that a person starts to experience the various phenomena related to piti. And you know and these are the things that are labeled as the as basically obstacles to insight, which I think is an unfortunate. I, the point of it is to get caught up in those things will interfere with the insight process. And so the message is, don't get caught up in these things. They're going to arise. Let them arise and let them pass away, just like all other phenomena do. Don't become attached to them. Apply the understanding you've already gained about attachment. And then this leads you to the later stage of the arising and passing away. If you get past being attached to piti, to joy, to pleasurable sensations in the body, to the luminous phenomenon and things like that. Now, somebody on a samatha path who is going, who reaches this stage knows what it's about. And but somebody who's doing this through vipassana, where the actual unification of mind that gives rise to this is not recognized and not a primary focus, it may come as a surprise. And these are the people who are most likely to cling to these, make them into something more than they are, and so forth. So, but you can see the parallels in what's happening there. Well, the latter stage of arising and passing away is really where there is the dawning of actual insight into the fact that impermanence is not about things arising and passing away. It's about process. But what will happen with a dry insight practitioner is that the mind will seize on the passing away of phenomena, right? And this becomes scary. Somebody who has much more well-developed metacognitive introspective awareness, who actually sees sensation and other phenomena like that as a part of a process going on within their mind, is going to understand and appreciate this much more easily and more readily as the fact that there are no things that arise and pass away, but rather there are processes, and depending on the rate at which those processes occur, and depending upon the complex conceptual overlay that we attach to those experiences, we can create in our mind a world of things that don't really exist, but that allow us to live in and work with this world that we don't have direct and immediate contact with, and to manipulate it, by creating a model of the world as made of things. We're able to work in it, survive, do the things that we want. But this view of phenomenon inevitably begins to include other things. You can see inherent in this, there's already an insight into emptiness. You can see inherent in this, there's also an inkling of mutual causality and the interdependent co-origination of all phenomena. You see that everything is caused by not just something else, but it's caused by everything else, and that everything is in turn the cause of consequences of all kinds. So these other insights are there. The emptiness, the impermanence in the sense of no thingness and process, you realize this applies to the self as well, and that the self no longer becomes this artificially solidified thing that one can cling to and fight to defend, and to crave the benefits for, and to be averse to that which is harmful, and so on and so forth. Now here's where we come to a vast difference between what Mahasi presents and what was originally being presented in Buddhaghosa. We have what are called sometimes the dukkha jnanas, or the knowledges of suffering. And these are described as, well, for Mahasi, he describes them as the knowledge of terror, the knowledge of I'm so familiar with these, and I can't remember exactly. Knowledge of terror, disgust, and the terror,
misery,
and what?
Misery.
Misery, yes, that's right. Yeah, you got it. Terror, misery, and disgust. That's the order in which they occur. Buddhaghosa, it's the knowledge of fearfulness. Mahasi has you falling into a state of terror, upon confronting these insights. Buddhaghosa says, does the meditator experience fearfulness? Remember, he calls it fearfulness, not terror. He says, does the meditator experience fearfulness? No, he does not, but he has the knowledge of the fearfulness of clinging to that which is impermanent without self. Uh, he has knowledge of, he has direct knowledge of the fearfulness of suffering that comes from clinging to those things. And then he gives examples like uh, the just as one uh, knows how terrible it would be to fall into a pit of burning coals. And one gory example is that a mother who had seen one of her sons beheaded would, and then the knowledge that the next one would be. That's the knowledge of the of fearfulness. That's a dramatic one, and that's the one that has been most used to justify the modern Buddhist reinterpretation of Buddhaghosa. Buddhaghosa is quite clear that what this is a deep, profound realization that, wow, this really is the cause of suffering. Clinging to these things, it is the knowledge of fearfulness, right? And then instead of the knowledge of disgust, there is the knowledge of oh, I wish I didn't have these little memory glitches. Anybody happen to remember Buddhaghosa's next two? One is dispassion. I think if that's the one that corresponds to disgust. Fearfulness. Um, danger. Knowledge of danger, right? It follows naturally that when you see, as a matter of fact, for Buddhaghosa, these all kind of happen at once. They're all, the one flows into the other and they become a single experience. The knowledge of fearfulness, of course, is accompanied by the knowledge of danger. Yeah, what is fearful is dangerous and it is to be avoided, right? It's almost it's, well, of course, no brainer, right? And then comes the knowledge of dispassion. Well, in an immature and poorly developed uh, meditative state, one might be, might fall into a state of misery and disgust as a result, feel actual terror, and out of the terror feel miserable. What can I do? There's no escape from this. Nothing is like the way I thought it was. This is horrible. I want to go back to my ignorance. Oh, seeing the truth is just so painful. And disgust with everything of the world, disgust with this, and there's nothing good about this life at all. Very Theravadin, right? Very life denying. Yeah. Not with Bodhigosa though. It's dispassion. Hey, wow, now that I realize the fearfulness and danger of these things, they no longer hold the same attraction, the same appeal. They no longer have the same power, right? And then this gives rise to, now these are the things, usually by stage 7, people are having insight experiences, they're achieving insight. These knowledges, these insights into the nature of all of these things will be in the process of arising and developing, but they'll be occurring in the context of a mind that has mastered these skills of shamatha, right? And is learning to apply these skills of shamatha to the investigation, the deep, profound investigation of reality. And this is accompanied by the discovery that joy and happiness actually arise from within and are completely independent of those external things. which matures into a kind of tranquility and then ultimately an equanimity. Why should I need to cling to the pleasant and to resist the unpleasant when the true sources of joy and happiness, tranquility, uh, lie within my own mind? This is, of course, a developing, maturing process. But this is why most people who complete the process of samatha vipassana will have also achieved at least stream entry and sometimes much further beyond. The last of the jhanas are basically an very much Abhidhamma based description of the kinds of mental processes uh, that lead to most typically a cessation event if you're doing this in meditation. But it doesn't necessarily happen that way. As a matter of fact, the order in which all of these jhanas occur uh, and the degree to which and the rate at which these jhanas mature and begin to gel into a new way of perceiving reality is subject to variation, whether you're doing dry insight or whether you're doing samatha vipassana. Now, there's some systems out there that are so highly scripted that you're going to experience what you're told to experience pretty much no matter what. And the there is a problem with that. I mean, it serves as a guide, but the problem is the mind. I mean, we know from dreams, from psychedelic substances, from all kinds of other. We know the mind can generate just about any experience that it can. Your mind can generate experiences that, in your normal waking state, you could never imagine, right? Therefore, if you're scripted strongly enough, your mind is going to produce exactly what the script says you should, right? So, anyway, so that's the danger there. And then somebody will be led to believe, this has happened and that's happened. I must be a stream entrant. I must be an arhat. I must be this. I must be that because I had these experiences and they're exactly the way they were described in the book. Well, yeah. The progress of insight um, is a useful tool. I think what I would love to do sometime maybe is just to write a blog where I deconstruct that and describe it as different aspects of a developmental process. Um, there are a variety of different aspects of our way of perceiving reality that uh, undergo profound change as we quote in the Buddha's words, see things more as they really are. And this is a progressive thing. And it happens in different aspects of our perception. There's a feedback between these. As we see more clearly in this dimension, then it leads us to see more clearly in that, and the combination of those and the feedback between them cause us to see more clearly in yet this other way. But all of this then feeds back to the first one. And so there is a deepening and a maturation, and you have all of these things interacting with each other at different times in the process. Um, some things may predominate more than others. And if we think of this from a systems view, and the mind is a system that is undergoing a journey of discovering a new, more robust, and more stable state, one that corresponds, a state from which one's perceptions are more of things as they really are. We're going to, this is being achieved you can take the overview and see it as being achieved in a stage-like process, but it's actually a passage through a variety of states of relative degrees of development. Well, one thing we know about complex dynamic systems undergoing this kind of process is that each phase shift to another stage is associated with some chaos. So that brings us directly towards to the second part of your question. About a month ago, I experienced a sudden drop in the clarity of the object of attention and a decrease in my ability to keep peripheral awareness wide open. Literally, one day, distractions would not be able to grab my attention at all during the whole sit. Yes, certain mental faculties had reached a certain level of maturity that allowed that. But then the next day, everything felt slippery and my attention would jump from one thing to the next. Yes, these things are common, and they, they're caused by many, many different factors, both internal and external. Internal can be both in terms of what happens on the cushion and what happens off. And of course, there's nothing that happens external to your mind and body in the course of your daily life that doesn't affect the way your mind and all of your different faculties function when you're on the cushion. This thing, everything becomes slippery, and you seem to have lost, you seem to have lost the awareness that kept that from happening. Well, this is not, I'm not trying to explain the specific experience you had, but I'm trying to give you sort of a generic explanation of this kind of thing that this might be. So, of your various mental faculties, the stability of attention and your awareness, especially as it becomes more and more metacognitive, had been developing in a tandem. And along with this, in the background, because you were focusing on the sensations of the breath, and you were looking for subtle breath-like sensations in stage 5. You were practicing expanding and contracting the scope of attention in both stage 5 and stage 6, things like that. Due to all of these things, there are other aspects of attention and awareness that then, other than the obvious ones that we point out and discuss. Let's look at attention by itself. Even in the teachings of the Buddha himself, there's a distinction made between directing and sustaining attention. Those are two totally different mental mechanisms. Directing attention refers to intentionally the mind system, with some degree of unification, choosing where its attention will go, as opposed to another part of the mind system, which tends to be dominant most of the time, where attention is just roaming the field of conscious awareness, looking for something of interest. And of course, what's of most interest? Something that either promises pleasure or threatens pain, right? And if not that, then just something that is interesting and allows attention, and it's predilection for focus and deconstruction and analysis and things like that. So we become interested. The attention spontaneously is drawn to something that is, quote, interesting for this whole variety of reasons, right? But there's another faculty, and that's the one we've been training, that where attention is intentionally directed. But then sustaining attention, there's a completely different mechanism that makes sure that attention doesn't get stuck too long in some place. It's what decides, hey, it's time for attention to be to go back to searching. All the time in this, in the background, the relationship between attention and awareness is you become aware of something, you hear something, you see something, or even a thought arises, and suddenly you realize this is something important. And so the awareness of that seizes attention and says, that sounded like a scream in the next room. That's important. That needs to be paid, attention needs to be paid to that. That needs to be investigated, or anything else you can imagine. Or a sudden thought and memory that something clicks and you realize that something someone said, uh, all of a sudden attention, awareness says, hey, that's something attention needs to focus on and examine. And you get caught up in the thought process. But then there's the release from that. Now, there's another aspect of attention too, which is what the word vipassana uh, refers to, which is seeing beyond what you expect to see. I look over there and I see, oh, there's my Harman Kardon speaker. Yeah, I've seen it 1,000 times. My mind dismisses it immediately unless I actually look at it and begin to see it as it really is. Embedded within that image arising in my mind are its purpose, its creators, its design, both functional and aesthetic, uh, my relationship to it, uh, how long has it been since I plugged it in and charged it? How long has it been since I used it? Why is it sitting over there out in the open since I haven't used it in over a week? Why didn't I put it away? All kinds of other things, right? Like now, this, all of these faculties are developing with regard to awareness, and with regard to metacognition, with the role of awareness and determining the salience, the importance, how not only are we training attention uh, to be directed towards things that more of the mind system as a whole has recognized as worthwhile and and in need of attention, so therefore directed attention, and that it stays on things for as long as we intend them to, rather than being this mechanism just setting attention free to chase after something else new of interest. Uh, uh, in addition to that, there is the, how to describe it, this aspect of awareness, which is, it's always been there, but now it's starting to come to the fore. More and more things in awareness are more clearly presented in consciousness. At some point, and this is a common experience, people entering stage 5 say, God, it seems like I have more distractions now than I did when I first started meditating. Well, what's happened is you are aware of all of this. Your awareness has expanded and it's brightened up, and now you see all of those potential distractions that were floating there in the penumbra of the field of conscious awareness all of the time. Yeah, all of these different faculties are interacting and undergoing a feedback process. So at some point, what happens? This expanded, clear awareness, suddenly the field of conscious awareness contains so many potential objects of attention. When it was more constricted and more confined, it was easier to maintain stability of attention. Now, all of a sudden, it's like you train your dog to behave itself really well at home. Then you go to the park where there's a whole bunch of other people walking their dog. Now, all of a sudden, hey, this is a whole different story, right? So your mind goes all slippery. Um, I'm not saying that that's what happens to you, but I'm saying that's the kind of things that happens. That's what in systems theory would be described as the chaos that precedes a new level of stability. And it describes what we're trying to achieve with these different levels of training in TMI. So I hope that's
Thank you. Yeah,
useful to you.
thank you very much.
Anybody want to comment further on that or ask any other questions before the Ricardos? And also need to see who else has questions uh, that and, oh yeah, Ricardo's one more question. Do you know of any virtual meditation retreats in the spirit of TMI? I know that my teacher training graduates are doing those. I don't know who is doing what where. Um, as I gradually am able to reestablish a support system, once again, I hope to be able to, I hope the time will come when I would be able to make that kind of information available on the website and answer questions like that more easily. But unfortunately, at the stage that things are at the moment, I just don't have that support system in place anymore. Uh, I I do hope and expect that to change soon, but unfortunately, I can't quite tell you who might be doing what at this point in time. Yes, Vadislav's question is next. So, yeah, once again, I just give everybody an opportunity if anybody wants to comment or ask before I change topics to. It seems no. Okay, good. Well, all right. Then let's look at uh, Vladislav's question. Um, Dear Culadasa, do you think that we will be able to use technology to accelerate awakening in the foreseeable future? I've heard Shinzen Young say that he really hopes that we will find some way to make meditation easier for most people using some kind of technology. Personally, I'm worried that it will be really hard to reach a critical mass of awakened people because enlightenment is not easy and takes a long time for most people, especially those who don't have good instructions, such as TMI. What are your thoughts on using technology to speed up meditation process progress or even cause awakening, both in the near and far future? This is a wonderful topic, and I'm glad you asked. First of all, one thing that always struck me is that when we read the suttas, it seemed like people were becoming awakened right and left, and it didn't take that long. Uh, um, and as Buddhism degenerated over the centuries, I mean, as recently as the early 20th century, there's a very common belief, particularly in Southeast Asia, and to some degree, even within Zen Buddhism, that awakening was a very rare phenomenon. In terms of Southeast Asia, where the four paths are emphasized, stream entrants were thought to be rare, and it was believed that there were no arhats, or if they were, that they were, had were in seclusion some way, somewhere, uh, and nobody knew about them. Part of the mythology that had developed around this was that if somebody became an arhat, they had to ordain and enter a monastery within 24 hours or they couldn't survive in the world. That's what Daniel Ingram calls the emotionally crippled arhat. which is just that's what my point is, that you look at the suttas and people were uh, achieving stream entry um, as a result of at the dinner table, as a result of the Buddha having been invited to share a meal with the family of someone. Uh, People were becoming, he was supposedly a conclave at Vulture's Peak of 1,200 arhats. Well, Vulture's Peak is small enough that you could never get 1,200 people into that particular location, but unless they were arhats who were able to somehow magically uh, occupy a small space. But I think even if we take that as metaphorical, the idea of a conclave of a huge number of arhats. Now, we can't totally trust the suttas because we know how much they got modified along the way. But what is really striking is a contrast between how easy it seemed to have been to achieve awakening in the time of the Buddha and how difficult it seems to be today, and even more difficult it seemed to be um, about a century ago in many Buddhist countries. So technology. Well, I mean that I wrote TMI because just as you, I feared that not enough people would be could be awakened to reach the critical mass that is necessary uh, to really even to survive, if not survive potential extinction, for all of the cultural heritage that humans have acquired to survive, and be not put ourselves back into the Stone Age and to a stage of illiteracy and so forth. Um, so I would say that me and that in my writing TMI and in the work of other teachers, including Shinzen, we've been trying to find ways to improve the success of people with meditation practices. Uh, Obviously, there's something about what's happened with the teaching of the Dharma and the meditation practices, which has made it much more difficult to achieve insight and awakening. And if we can, and well, I feel like we've succeeded to a certain degree. But as when it comes to technology, and I will include not only technology like neurofeedback and various uh, kinds of brain stimulation. Shinzen himself is currently working with somebody who has developed a very powerful and novel form of ultrasound, using focused ultrasound to stimulate or inhibit certain parts of the brain in order to deep parts of the brain that are not accessible through transcranial magnetic stimulation or electrical stimulation, um, in hopes that this will unlock some secrets which will help to accelerate awakening. But beyond that, too, there are people who are doing a lot of work with uh, psychedelic substances. Now, this actually bears a little bit on another question that we were asked today about the role of shamanism and its relationship to meditation. I found myself that these substances, peyote, uh, uh, psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus, which contains many of the same uh, active components, psychoactive components as peyote, ayahuasca, and the 5-MeO dimethyltryptamine that's found in the secretions of the Sonoran Desert frog, uh, which I've caught myself and milked the glands on their face and dried that substance and smoked it. Um, the LSD and all of the, there's a book called PCAL, PAHKAL. It's called Phenyl, Phenylethylamines I Have Known and Loved is what it stands for. And there are a lot of new substances in addition to those present in plants that have the potential to open up areas of our both conscious and subconscious experience in a way that could very well contribute to awakening. Another question that was asked today, I don't know if we'll get to, but has to do with Ken Wilber's cleaning up and growing up that needs to take place together with awakening. The traditional use, the shamanic use of ayahuasca, of peyote, of psilocybin mushrooms, of even the Amanita muscaria, other substances like this, the traditional use of those in the traditional ceremonial settings are really powerful for bringing about that cleaning up and growing up, which is an important aspect of waking up. I have tremendous hopes that all of these different technologies will be helpful in a variety of different ways. At the same time, I keep seeing in the people that are focused on this, they're being trapped by a kind of linear thinking, an oversimplification. What we're talking about is we're taking the most complex system known to us in the entire universe, the human brain and nervous system. We're talking about modifying it, the way that it functions through meditation. We not only modify the way that it functions, but by modifying the way it functions, we force it to reorganize itself in dramatic ways, to dramatically reorganize itself, to restructure itself. New neural pathways developed, old neural pathways obliterated. All kinds of things are happening as a result of meditation practice. And these changes are happening throughout our brains. These aren't localized structures. That's an old view of the brain. Back when what we little knew we knew about the function of brain structures was somebody would have a stroke or some other kind of damage to one particular part of the brain, and it would produce specific kinds of changes in perception and behavior and everything else. And so we were able to map the brain as this structural modularity of it and say, oh, well, that's a speech area. Oh, that area is responsible for this function, and that area is related to that. But since then, we've learned that it's not really like that at all. Those are merely a small subset of the systems of the brain. And even those areas that we point to as, oh, this is the speech area. Well, we don't do that anymore. We'll say that this is that part of the speech system, which happens to be distributed over a number of areas. And that's what we find is all of these functions are distributed through many parts of the brain, involve many different neural circuits, large distributed neural circuits. And not only that, one neural circuit overlaps with another, meaning that there are circuits within one large brain circuit, which are also parts of a completely different large brain circuit. When we recognize the complexity of the brain and the changes that accompany the functional changes that we're after ends with insight and awakening. This kind of limited linear thinking that we're going to stimulate or inhibit one particular structure or two or three particular structures or even 8 or 10 particular structures and somehow magically produce awakening is excessively naive. Psychoactive substances work by altering neurotransmission in specific circuits that happen to use those neurotransmitters or happen to have that particular variant of receptor for neurotransmitters. Their psychoactive properties are based on their being able to stimulate a particular kind of receptor or cause a change in the amount of release of a particular type of neurotransmitter, so on and so forth. These things, I think they can all be used adjunctively, but ultimately it's only the mind system functioning as a system, as a whole, all of the different parts of it being altered in a developmental way uh, through interaction with each other. So we can augment that. And I'm looking forward to the day that we have the means that we can use those kinds of augmentation to assist in what heretofore has been done through meditation practices. Now, the first thing that we need to understand much, much better is what we are doing when we're meditating that produces the kind of results. And one really good approach to doing that is to look at how the same insights and the same kinds of awakening are produced in completely different kinds of practices. This is going to give us the key to understanding the functional changes that are taking place. Then this can be transposed into various ways of using technological and chemical interventions to accelerate that process. And I don't believe that's very far away. At the same time, with a world that is going more and more into various kinds of crises, which are consuming all of our resources, including our scientific resources, COVID-19, in many different ways, by pulling people out of laboratories, by rediverting the focus of research priorities and money for research and things like that. Um, Research on ways to alter the mind for insight and awakening is very much a kind of thing on the fringe anyway. With these kinds of global emergencies drawing upon those kinds of on research uh, resources in general, that's going to interfere with that process. But I deeply hope, I think the potential is there that we could make use of all of these things, all of these, all of these technologies. But I think the most important thing is going to be understanding the mind from the inside and understanding the mind from the outside, which is the brain. As I like to say, what I do is I study the brain from the inside through meditation, and I study the mind from the outside through neuroscience. Um, it's but it's the knowledge, and then that knowledge can be applied both to more being better at doing what the Buddha did, which is bringing people to insight and awakening through practice, but augmented then with that understanding. These brain stimulation and the use of psychedelics and things like this can be part of our discovery, part of our investigation, part of our deeper understanding. But they can also be then, once that understanding develops, they can become tools for that. So this is the kind of thing that Shenzhen is interested in. I know one afternoon when we were talking, he said to me, I picture the day when somebody walks into a clinic, they go up to the desk and they sign a release. And then a few minutes later, they're called into a back room, and they come out a few hours later, and they are now a fully awakened being. Well, um, I mean that is a lovely fantasy, but maybe in the 30th century, or maybe in the 26th century, or maybe in the 24th century, the era of Star Trek. I don't know, but not in the 21st century. I don't see signing a release and coming out awakened a few hours later. But I do see within the 21st century the potential for using all of these different resources to make awakening far more accessible to far more people. And I see as just as important as that, um, the first two of the Eight Noble Truths, right understanding. Right understanding actually occurs twice in the Eight Noble Truths because at it it takes two forms. The first that is usually described, is right understanding as intellectual understanding of the Dharma. And the second, that's cognitive. The second is conative. The second is how that understanding gets applied through thought and intention that alters behavior and perception. So those are both, even now, potentially far more accessible. Uh, uh, well, they're potentially far, far more accessible than they actually are right now, because the Dharma is presented in archaic ways with archaic language, with a tremendous overlay of the first word that comes to my mind is bullshit. But let me just say distortion, introduction of religious and philosophical um, views uh, that often misinterpret or reinterpret the knowledge they already have available for this. But I think that in addition to increasing the number of awakened people, just increasing the number of people at the level of the first noble truth, first two noble truths, cognitively and conatively, understand this Dharma. It is understandable. It is intellectually accessible. It is subject to the recognition and appreciation and application, even without the much deeper experiential uh, uh, development that the other six noble truths are all about. So both of those are fronts that could be worked on. Um, Technology has its place, but so does, what would we call it? Well, so does cognitive science. So does cognitive science applied to meditation and meditation techniques, and what's really happening there, and what is awakening, what is insight, how does insight come about in terms of our ordinary experience, in terms that a non-meditator, someone who's not familiar with Buddhism, and you can explain to them on the basis of experiences that they've already had, something that allows them to understand things like, oh my God, yes, obviously everything is interconnected. Obviously my sense of ego self is nothing but a construct of my mind. Obviously the stories I tell myself and the things that I cling to are the causes of my suffering. You know, obviously nothing is really the way I think it is, and every single person that I meet is really living in their own world. They may be all variations of the same theme, but they're simply models of reality, and none of them are accurate representations of. All of these insights are available intellectually, and can be understood intellectually. And I believe therefore there are two tipping points. One is the cognitive and conative, and the other is the full development of insight and awakening. And all of these technologies, uh, they have tremendous potential for contributing to that. So that is my long-winded answer to that. See, if you ask me questions about things that I have really strong feelings about, uh, you get long-winded answers.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Let's see if there's someone else here who's. Why don't you tell me? Is there anyone else here that actually has one of your questions is up here, and I'll deal with it next. Oh, Tom, you've got a question.
Yeah,
All right.
actually, I think I arrived late, and I have a question on the list.
I'm sorry. Who am I?
Yeah.
Tom. Okay, you arrived late, and you okay? You have a question that's on that list, or which
Yeah.
list? Oh yeah, Tom Sawyer. Okay. All right. Let's see. I remember it. Here it is. Tom Sawyer's. Yeah, take the S off, and you become the classic hero of my childhood. Okay. I've been reading about what you call the mind system, Minsky, Society of Mind, Barr's Theater of Consciousness. It seems that nowadays there is a large consensus about the idea that our mind works as a distributed mind system rather than an egotist consciousness. Yes, absolutely. I have two questions about the system. One, it appears that most of information is processed unconsciously. Can we say that it works better this way? Unless we are in a learning process, and therefore we should interfere as minimally as possible and try just to be a witness of our own processes. Tom, I'm going to say something that's a bit different than what you have here. You say, it appears that most of information is processed unconsciously. What I'm going to say is all information is processed unconsciously. Consciousness is the way, what we experience subjectively as consciousness is the process by which all of these unconscious components of our mind, which are doing the actual process of processing of information, communicate with each other. So you might like to read the fifth and the seventh interludes in TMI, where I talk about the mind system more generally, because I go into this. I do go into this somewhat. Consciousness is where information exchange takes place. They're learning. You say, can we say that it works better this way? And therefore we should interfere as minimally as possible and try just to be a witness of our own processes. I'm going to take that part of what you say, and I'm going to reconstruct that a little bit. What we experience in consciousness, as I say, is the communication process of different parts of our mind. The contents of consciousness are of two distinct natures. One is what we refer to as attention, which focuses, isolates, analyzes, deconstructs. It tremendously oversimplifies phenomena, but that gives it the enormous power of giving us the ability to analyze. The deconstruction is followed by a synthesis process. And so the events that take place in the unconscious parts of the mind that are associated with attention are doing an extremely important job. Now, for most of us, attention dominates consciousness. The processing of information by attention takes up the hog's share of our conscious bandwidth, which is fairly limited. But as we go along, we learn to let this other process that we refer to as awareness, particularly metacognitive awareness. This is where the larger scale view of reality resides. This is the field of conscious awareness, is the field in which attention operates. And what we want is to maximize what both have to offer. What we're looking for is to get to that place where, in response to the global, holistic, relational view of awareness, that part of the unconscious mental processing that projects the field of conscious awareness, to direct much more effectively the application of this very specialized and wonderfully powerful tool. We're sort of comparing a microscope to a telescope here in a way. But to focus that microscope where it's most usefully focused, that the trouble with the way that that microscope of attention works is it's always working by trying to create a simpler and more manageable representation of reality. And if we mistake that process for being an accurate representation of reality, this is what blocks us from deeper and more powerful understanding. So we don't want to minimize anything. We want to maximize everything. And part of that maximization, we don't want it to end up being a competition between different unconscious systems. We want it to be an integrated cooperation. We want to maximize the functionality and the integrated cooperation of these unconscious systems, which give rise to the conscious experience of awareness and attention. So let me just go back to the wording of your question. Can we say that it works better this way? And you're referring to conscious versus unconscious, but I'm rephrasing that in terms of, is it better that it works with both of these systems interacting optimally, or with the attention dominating process that constitutes most of what the untrained mind is experiences as the contents of consciousness? Well, we would like that part to interfere as minimally as possible, but to serve its proper function as maximally as possible. If you look at the appendix, the second appendix called Analytical Meditation, it is a training in using these two systems in an optimal way. And so I call your attention to that. Now you go on to say the theater where our moment-by-moment awareness takes place, especially in meditation, seems to have limited capacity and can track information almost one by one. But it is not that obvious. For instance, let's say that in meditation I'm focused on my breath as central awareness. If I hear a noise like a loud working machine, I feel that I can stay focused on the breath and at the same time hear the disturbing noise. Can we say that the breath remains central, or share the space consciousness with the machine noise, or that it is an illusion and that there is still a moment by moment breath sound way of processing information. This is really what I'm trying to convey in all of the first 6 stages and in the interludes that are part of those stages. Unfortunately, I mean, one of the things that I really need to do is to rewrite that interlude on the moments of consciousness model, because really, what I did is I tried to apply the phenomenon of awareness to the Abhidhammic moments, should be called moments of attention model. And my attempt to do that missed the mark, which I'm very aware of right now. But let's see, going back to trying to address your question as directly as I can. You're focusing on breath as central awareness. No, the focus is happening by a different part of your mind system. It is isolating the breath from all of the other contents of the field of conscious awareness. Okay? If I hear a noise like a loud working machine, I feel I can stay focused on the breath and still hear this disturbing noise. Much, much more than that. You can, as your mind becomes trained, keep your attention focused on the breath, whereas the contents of your awareness become brighter and clearer. And it's not just that machine noise in the background, but all kinds of things that are happening internally as well as externally, as sensations in your body, not just from your ears, but in your body as a whole, but also the different processes that are taking place in the background of your mind, the different thoughts that don't become objects of attention, but that arise and pass away nevertheless, in a more nonverbal form in general, the emotions that arise and pass away, the subjective experience of mental states that are continuously arising and passing away in different forms. The faculty of awareness can begin to include that, and that becomes a major part of your conscious experience of any given moment. Now, as we're approaching that, we do have this in-between stage where attention is alternating back and forth between attention on the breath and attention to the noise in the background. But if it's spending most of its time on the attention, on the breath, if attention is spending most of its time, rather, on the breath, but attention is also going to the sound in the background, even though awareness, even though sati, even though mindfulness isn't developed powerfully enough that remains clear while the attention is focused on the breath, we can, just by attention going back and forth between breath and sound, we can have the experience of knowing both breath and sound with a relatively high degree of clarity. But when we move beyond that, we begin to have both, and there is no alternating of attention. That the sound and many, many other things are clearly present in awareness. They take a different form. The emphasis in that perception is less on the sound of the machine in the background. It could be your refrigerator compressor comes on while you're sitting in meditation, or your air conditioning comes on, or somebody starts mowing the lawn next door, or something like that. You start experiencing that in awareness as part of the wholeness of the moment, while your attention remains focused on the breath and doesn't need to deviate from that in order for you to enjoy that awareness of the sound of the machine, whatever the machine is. But to enjoy that consciousness of that sound from a more holistic perspective, which attention can never bring to it. Were you able to follow me with that?
Yeah, sort of.
I think the really important thing is recognizing, first of all, that consciousness is where information is exchanged. So it does reflect what's happening in the unconscious mind. That's important. There are two ways we have of knowing the world, both consciously and unconsciously, and they're quite different from each other. And the conscious aspect of that, we can deconstruct consciousness into attention and awareness. That's a convenient way of doing it that reflects these two ways of information processing. But the only thing that we know is what arises in consciousness. The only thing we know about what's happening unconsciously are what aspects of unconscious processing gets projected into consciousness in order to be exchanged with other parts of the mind system. One of the wonderful things about understanding your mind is seeing attention and awareness as such very different things, as such very different ways of knowing. This is like one of the most huge ahas you can have about the mind system and what it is and the way it works, what consciousness is and how it arises from the mind system. And you go through this period of as the faculty of awareness becomes stronger and as the faculty of attention becomes more cooperative and interactive with awareness, then you actually can detect the movements back and forth of attention to various things in the field of awareness. But then you go beyond that to the point where attention only needs to alternate with other things when there's some reason for it to. In stage 8, there are all kinds of practices given there for you to use attention in exactly that way and to use awareness and attention interactively, right? So you said you sort of got it. So if there's anything further that you'd like, I could help clarify that, that would be great.
Well, about the first part of the question, it's just that, I realized many times that when I was doing something that I really know, not something that I'm learning because I have to focus on it, but something that I really know, like driving, like this is really typical. It works much better when you are not getting involved in it. Of course, you must be there, but like on a background, and many things in your life, in fact, work much better when you are not really involved in it. You just let them happen. And in fact, those processes works like unconsciously. You can witness them, but in fact, if you try to be too close to them, they start to degrade. They are not so good because you interfere with them. And I realize that
Yes.
of our way of doing things are kind of automatic and works much better this way. And you just have to be there, and just in case something happens, like typically when you drive your car, if something unexpected happen on the road, then you really have to be there to really take a decision somewhere. But most of the time you don't need it. You just stay like watching it, aware of it, but in the background, and you most of your life can work much better this way. In a way, the problem, many problems, dukkha, as you say, as Buddhists say, it's most of the time it comes from interference. We want to be involved too much in things, and things works much better without our interference. That's sort of insight I realized, I would say.
That's absolutely. I agree totally. That is the common experience. Driving, you need a high level of awareness. If you get too lost, you get too lost in thought, you become highly vulnerable. That's why talking on a phone or something like that becomes very, very dangerous when driving, because uh, it diminishes your awareness, and somebody can cut in front of you, and you don't have the presence to react swiftly enough. You know, you need a high level of awareness, but awareness is going to act much more rapidly uh, than attention ever can, and that's something that I discuss in the first interlude on that's on awareness and attention. That's one of the characteristics. Um, Awareness, having powerful awareness, allows you to respond much more effectively to all kinds of situations. But there are times when you absolutely must have attention online as well. Um, you there are more complex situations where you need to bring to bear the more focused and analytical functions of the mind. Um, Take the instance of driving, and somebody cuts in front of you, and there is no way not to hit something. To choose that it's wiser to hit um, uh, a trash can than it is the other car or a pedestrian on the sidewalk, for example, right? Hitting the trash can probably won't cause you to lose control of the vehicle. It may damage your vehicle, but it's, you need to bring to bear, and that's what happens, isn't it? In that kind of situation, you're responding out of awareness, and then attention immediately is brought online. And if there are those kinds of distinctions to be made, then attention can jump in and do its analytical job. Um, but with so many skills, they are so well developed in the unconscious level that to do anything consciously at all other than observe is going to be an interference which spells disaster. It's like riding a bike. When you first learn to ride a bike, you keep paying attention and trying to correct for things, and your corrections are always too late and too much and in the wrong, and so you keep falling off until the time comes that those unconscious processes take over. And the less attention you pay, then the better you are at riding your bike, right? This is true of so very, very many things. Um, One of the things that we know is that the contents of consciousness, there's a time delay between what's actually happened in the unconscious mind, including sensory information arriving in consciousness and making a decision. There is almost a quarter-second delay between your mind making a decision unconsciously and you becoming consciously aware of it. It's amazing, you know. But the interesting thing is that there is a part of that interval where other parts of your mind, not consciously, but other unconscious parts of your mind can intervene. What you will consciously experience then is this interesting thing that you will have already not done the thing, not pushed the button, but in the meantime, your mind will have decided to push the button, and then another part of your mind will have decided not to. And what you subjectively experience is a story after the fact. The after the fact story is, I decided to push the button, and the I is a fiction. But then I changed my mind and I decided not to. This entire story that is told in consciousness is a fabrication, because this all happened unconsciously,
Yes.
and it arrived in consciousness a, a a measurable period of time after both of these events had already occurred.
Yeah, and the funny thing is many times we take decisions or do things, and it's happening without any mentalization, but we mentalize just after. You know, we kind of explain to ourselves what is going
Yeah,
on.
right.
You know, that's the funny thing, because we think we are doing it, but in
That's
fact we
right.
are not. The decision has been made, and we just like, oh yeah, I think I'm doing this because blah blah blah, and we just making a story of things that have been decided unconsciously, and that's amazing. How many things works this way?
That's right. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yeah.
Culadasa, I might just jump in here very quickly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Tom, it's interesting that Culadasa mentioned the analytical meditation, because I just read that again last night, and I think it speaks so well to what you've just described and your question in general. And it is the most marvelous experience to try analytical meditation, and to see that how that process of just taking a problem and just holding it in consciousness without trying to manipulate it or analyze it, how then, as the mind model that Culadasa has put forth, where the consciousness is a space where all the unconscious minds have access to that data or that thing, and they all work on it simultaneously, and then come up with this insight, is pretty amazing. And I think it's exactly what you've talked about, and it's been so helpful for me to figure things out. I actually have added another step to that, which is I do analytical meditation as I fall asleep. And really that what you speak about, Culadasa, the unconscious mind having this awesome creative power that we wish we could tap into in our daily lives. It comes up sometimes as one enters the dream state. So yeah, pretty amazing. And I just wanted to ask, I don't know if this is the time for it, Culadasa, but you mentioned the moments of consciousness model and how you'd perhaps like to change or explain it differently. And I would really be interested in hearing about that, because it's so important to the TMI system.
Yes. Yes. It is very important, and it always ends up being a major topic of discussion. Always has in the teacher training classes. So, uh, aren't you, or weren't you in one of those teacher training classes?
Yes, I'm in the meta group.
You're in the meta group. Yeah, so I'm really hoping that you and the Corona group will be able to come up with a common time very, very soon, so that we can resume those classes and we can get in depth into that.
Yeah, because I think the moments of consciousness model is such an important part of TMI, that if you have some revisions to it, that would be important information to get out there.
Yeah.
So I know Elizabeth is listening, so she will probably send out an email and we'll try and get our classes going again. But maybe for the benefit of the Patreons, at some stage, I could put in a question about that, and you could share some of your revisions with us.
Yeah, that will be another one of my long-winded answers.
Yeah, but I think it would be time well spent.
I agree. I'm happy to do it. I'm excited at the prospect. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks.
We've got a load of questions here that I didn't get to yet, unfortunately. Uh,
Culadasa, may I just ask a question about Tom's question? Is there a moment for that?
oh, there is, yeah. Um, there's nothing I would rather be doing than talking to you folks right now. There's something else I have to do at 1 o'clock, but so go ahead, please.
I'm just wondering if it seems to me that there's a real importance to differentiate between this stepping back and allowing things to happen automatically in some way, that there's a real difference between people who might have different levels of awareness around that. Like what happens for us, like when we get on a treadmill and we automatically, like these habitual behaviors like driving, where we automatically let something happen. And there's a real difference between whether you're present for that or not present for that. And I think Tom's really making the point that what he's speaking about is being present. It reminds me of like when you're exercising and the benefits that they speak about that are so different between whether or not you are there in some way that you are observing through awareness, so there's that, because I think in some ways what could happen is that people could think unawareness is somehow some optimal mode.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's so tough to kind of, I just wanted to make that point and I really appreciated that Tom was really clear about being there, kept using that phrase, being there. But there is a way in which someone could step back and really not be there, or be in ruminating mind, or just be in dullness, and thinking that was somehow what we're going for.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Can I say something? But actually, that is the challenge. The challenge is to be there, but to be aware in the background. And most of the time, whether we are just like not there at all, we are lost in mind and thinking about things and whatever, and danger can happen, like if it's the case of driving or whatever, or we are I don't know, we are too much interfering. We are not really listening, So in fact, I would say that one of the best way to be to let things happen in the best way would be to be there, but let yourself do the things better than in fact your eye would do it. Sorry, I don't have the words to say it correctly, but maybe you get the picture.
Well, let's take Rachel's example of you're on a treadmill. Pretty much always, I think, when people are on a treadmill, they're ruminating, they're lost in some thought. They are totally not present. What would happen if they just did nothing but form the intention to be present? Well, both your awareness and your attention are going to say, well, what is there here to be aware of? But if you hold that intention, then they're going to start discovering that. And there's so much to be aware of. There are all the bodily sensations that you're going to experience as a part of being in a treadmill, and they're changing. You know the changes that they go through. You know them even though you've never really been fully present for them. They've still registered in your mind somewhat. What happens if you're really totally present for those changes that occur in your body? But not just in your body, in your mind, the thoughts and the feelings. There's certain thoughts and feelings that are taking place as a part of what's actually there, of being on the treadmill. All of these things. If you approach being on a treadmill with the intention of, okay, I'm going to be present with what's happening. There's your body, there's everything that's happening inside your mind, there's everything that's happening around you in the room. There are background thoughts from the rest of your life. When you're really present, these all merge into a whole. I am an embodied consciousness, and this present in which I exist also includes my past and my future and my environment and my body and my actions and my reactions and everything else. That's what is called mindfulness with clear comprehension. Sati Sampajana.
Thank you. Yeah, that's just that difference between being in the moment in that way and still, like Tom was saying, not interfering in the sense that we would normally think of that. It's such a good analysis.
Yeah, your only intervention is holding the intention to stay present. That's only you don't do anything else. You just observe what happens after that. Yeah.
Just shut up and listen.
Shut up and listen. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Be there. Be here now.
And even in the section in the book, it's called, you said, let the problem speak to you. Listen to it and speak to you. Those are the exact same words that you use.
Yes.
So yeah, Tom, read that section again. It might, if you haven't read it in a while or haven't read it before, it might surprise you how accurate you've understood what's going on.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I guess that's probably enough for today. Let's see. There's so many lovely questions, but well, we're going to get together. We're going to get together again in a couple of weeks. Aga has asked a question, one of the questions that I was not able to get to last week again. So we have questions from Aga, Matt, and Software Dev that we didn't get to today. And I'll try to make a point of getting to them next time. Yeah. There's also another really good question that I'm surprised isn't on this list that did come into my email. I'm going to have to relocate that and make sure it gets on this list for next time. Anyway, anyone want to make any last comments, observations, or anything like that? We'll save the remaining questions for next time, but is there anything else anyone wants to add before you go? I'm sure you've got lives waiting to be lived outside of this world of Zoom. Yes. Yes, okay. Wonderful. Well, enjoyed being with you here today, and hope you enjoyed it too, and look forward to next time. Take care. Stay well.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. You too.
Thank you. I will.